Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ground Up Show, the podcast, as you know, that is hosted from my dining room. And finally, after 60 episodes of recording this podcast in Los Angeles, I have found the worst time to record. So for about 15 minutes in this podcast, not a very long time, you will hear the light and beautiful sounds of my neighbor's lawn being landscaped. There is 60 seconds of exceptionally annoying lawn blowing. I don't know what it was. It sounded like something out of Transformers. It wasn't pleasant, but I didn't want to edit it out because my guest had some, I thought, really interesting comments during those moments. So I did my best to tune it down. I don't think it's going to be very distracting. But of course, I just wanted to warn you. That's the nature of building something from the ground up. You don't always have the ideal setup. You don't always have the best locations to shoot at. Sometimes you have to do it in your dining room when you're just getting started out. That's the way it is. That's the beauty of this show. And that's the beauty of starting something from nothing. So anyway, just wanted to give you a brief warning. But my guest today is a very creative, very talented director named Cole Walliser. He has worked with some pretty big talent, including Miley Cyrus, Katy Perry, and Pink. On the podcast, we talk about traditional media versus new media, building confidence, and why decision-making is the most important skill that you need to learn if you want to be successful in any field. It's a very interesting podcast. I think you'll get tons and tons of value from it. But first, before we get into that, I would love to talk a little bit about how I make a living and how I'm able to do this podcast advertisement free. It's because of viewers and listeners like you. This podcast is fully independent and advertisement free because of a small percentage of Patreon subscribers. If you go over to patreon.com/Matt Diavella, you can contribute as little as $1 per episode to keep it ad-free, or if you want to contribute a little bit more, you can get access to secret videos, vlogs, AMAs that break down a little bit more what it takes to make the Ground Up Show. I talk about lifestyle design, creativity, filmmaking, business, a lot of really interesting things that provide lots of value to the small audience over there. So if you want to contribute, if you want to learn a little bit more about all these things, you can check it out at patreon.com/Matt Diavella. As always, thank you guys so much for watching and enjoy the show. Cole, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excited to chat both about like the new media, the traditional media, and like where that overlap. We already talked a little bit about it.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, why don't you tell me a little bit about the work that you currently do?
Well, I am currently a director who does a lot of beauty stuff. So I started with like female pop star type content. And that is segued into stuff for like CoverGirl, Revlon, Almay. I did a spot for Garnier last week. I do stuff for Pantene and a lot of beauty focused things. I do other things, but that sort of seems to be my niche a little bit, which I don't mind.
Yeah, how did that niche how did that start? Like when did you first like find that lane? Because it definitely, the work that you do now is the work you're going to get in the future.
Yeah.
So at some point there had to be like the beginnings.
Well, it first started with Pink, really. I started working with her in 2009. And that was like my first major artist I was doing some stuff with. I did stuff with Miley Cyrus, like when she was doing the Hannah Montana thing. And a bit of stuff with Britney early. So even I guess then it was sort of leaning a little bit more female pop star beauty stuff. But working with Pink, I ended up working with her for like 8 years. And so I was doing her content behind the scenes. I was doing her tour videos, like the content that plays during her shows. I would direct that stuff. So the opening, closing of her tour videos. Did documentaries on the road with her. But she ended up being a cover girl. And so when she started doing that, she brought me on to do the content. I met the CoverGirl people, and then I ended up working with Katy. Katy was also a CoverGirl. Then I was doing both Katy and Pink's CoverGirl stuff. And once you have that sort of on your resume, other beauty brands are like, oh, we can use this guy for this or that. And it sort of like grew from there.
That's an interesting kind of position where I don't think a lot of people realize this, but the fact that talent has a lot of say in terms of
Oh,
who
yeah.
gets hired and
Yeah.
who doesn't. I was talking to Brian Bowen Smith about that, where he'll have certain people that will, like actors or whoever, fight for him to get the job because they really love working with him or they love his work or whatever it may be. Is that something that you found happen quite often?
Oh yeah, I mean, talent at that caliber,
Yeah.
talent has all the leverage. You know what I mean? So it's like if they want something, then the brand, the client is gonna do it. You know what I mean? Of course, I think I'm sure there's discussion sometimes, and you have to make the best choice for things. But if I've been kicked off jobs because the talent, I didn't have a strong relationship with them, and they had their guy, and then so I didn't get that job. You know what I mean? So it goes both ways, I guess. But I've been sort of fortunate enough to have good sort of relationships with different talent, and that has been helpful.
Yeah.
But I don't want to make it seem like, oh, just go out and just like try to BFF all these celebrities. You know what I mean?
It's never gonna happen.
No, that's never gonna work. But like, I never sort of like I became friends with him through work. It's like the work was doing. I would think that I'm doing good work for that person, and like that relationship bloomed from that as a basis. You know what I mean? And so that has been beneficial in the career.
Yeah, there's only so far that like just connections and friendship I think can take you. Because I certainly know of people who've gotten gigs or opportunity and especially access over myself, regardless of their talent. But inevitably, the talent's going to speak for itself, and you can only get so far if you're not actually good at what you do.
Oh yeah, I mean, talent is like the baseline in LA. Unfortunately, you know what I mean. Like everybody out here is super skilled and super talented, and that's where it starts. It then becomes like, what else can you add to the table? What other value can you add? And that's where that's where you really sort of find your success and can thrive. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, it can be discouraging to be like, talent is the bare minimum you need. Like you need talent, obviously, but I mean, it only goes up from there. So.
Well, it's tough, right? Because there's just a lot of people. It's kind of saturated at this point.
Oh yeah.
Where, especially coming to a place like LA or New York, where even if you have the skills and the chops to be able to get your foot in the door is kind of tough, right?
Oh, absolutely. And for me, it was like I generally am thankful that I sort of started my career just before like the DSLR revolution and the YouTube world, whereas I started getting some work and sort of establishing myself before that happened, because I just think it became so saturated, like you said, and it was so hard to stand out. Afterwards, I would notice people would be making really dope stuff and like getting zero recognition and zero notice, and I was like, oh man, that's tough. That's tough out there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
do you have this experience where I will look at some people's work who have been maybe in the game for a year, and I'm like, holy shit, like it's really good. Like my first 3 years combined, I couldn't find enough like talent in those years. Like I was shooting with mini DV tapes,
yeah,
and
me too, yeah.
My first professional camera was a Canon XHA1, which was like a great camera at the time, but now it's like you couldn't use that footage on anything.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of an interesting place because and I don't know, I think there's probably only so far that can get you, right? Because in terms of like quality, like you buy a Red camera, great, but can you actually use it? Can you like work with clients? Can you deliver on deadlines and do all these other things that are necessary to make it?
Well, that's the thing too. Yes, there's a ton of like these really young kids that have a great eye, that are talented. And I was listening to actually another show of yours the other day, and you were talking about how it's super valuable to consume a lot of media early on. And I think that that's never been more accessible and prevalent with the sort of new generation today because of Instagram, because of YouTube. It's like, you can quickly refine your style and tone by like browsing the popular pictures. You know what I mean? But I think that as we mentioned before, it's like people trying to make the jump of like making cool content to being a sort of working director with brands and clients is a bit of a disconnect, because you have to manage more than just like making a cool thing. And that was a big lesson for me, was as I sort of grew as a director and started doing sort of more like bigger jobs with bigger clients, I started to realize that it wasn't so much about like, oh, having a cool idea and executing this. It's about managing production, client relations, like delivering something that the client wants you to deliver. And that has been a sort of a learning lesson for me. It's more the business managerial side that I think is my success is sort of due in part of. it's not just like, oh, I know how to have like a cool idea and make it awesome every single shoot. It's like all the other stuff, you know what I mean? Which you never get access to or experience in making just like a cool 2-minute video for YouTube or whatever, you know?
Right, because if you make an amazing film for a client, something that like they would be thrilled to have and like super, like it would beyond their expectations, beyond their wildest dreams, but you deliver it a week late, or you deliver it past the deadline, or you don't communicate properly, that relationship's going to crumble. It doesn't matter how good you are. There's probably only a few people, and like we were talking about, like where the talent can have the sway. Sometimes you can get in that position, but if you're starting out like that, there's no way that you're going to be able to continue getting gigs.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wish I could remember the specifics. I read something about this exact thing where there was like 3 sort of facets where it was like good to work with.
Yes, it was like the buttons that were kind of switching on and off, whereas like basically cost. Yeah. Time, and then I forget the other.
Good to work with. I remember. So it was like
yeah.
there's these 3 facets, and you can, if you do 2 of them well, you can like mess up on one. So like if you're really good to work with, I think it was being good to work with, like they like you, making a good product, and then being on time. So it's like if you're good to work with, and you make a good product, but you're often late, they'll still hire you because they like you and you do good work. So they'll deal with you being late sometimes. If you're late and they really like you and like your product is, if you're on time and they really like you and your product is so-so, they'll still hire you because like turn it on time and they like working with you, so you'll still get jobs. And so it's like, I always found it interesting that you need 2 of those 3 variables to continue working, and it seemed applicable. I mean, I try to hit all 3, of course, right?
Yeah.
But it just sort of, it was an interesting thought on like how you can continue to work. And what clients might be thinking of when they're hiring you and working with you. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily about like, obviously the goal is to be as good as you can in all facets, but like if you're good, they could hate you. But like if your work is good and it's on time and they hate you, they'll put up with your bullshit because they're like, he's good and he's on time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just an interesting way to see it.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And I think that also comes into play with how much you can charge and your rate, and like increasing your rate is like if you can nail all 3 of them, then you're the kind of person that can charge a premium because people are willing to pay to be able to check all 3 boxes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the instance where you are all 3, where your work is good, you're on time, you know, and they like you, it's like then it's like you'll work with them forever. They're like they'll be a client for as long as you want to do it, right?
Yeah. So you're doing a lot of work in the industry. You're directing some pretty awesome talent. And then you start to dabble with YouTube and kind of making the vlogs and the YouTube. Like your YouTube channel is pretty cool because it's got a blend of both your personal life and then offering some of these like directing tips and advice for filmmakers that are just getting started out. Why'd you decide to go that route?
Well, you know, I thought about it. I was thinking about this a lot last year where I was like, you know, Instagram was like fun and I'd put some work on there, but I wasn't super serious about it at the beginning of last year. And I did this one job for E! Called the Glam Bot, which is like high speed red carpet glam stuff. And I co-directed one with this guy, Nigel Barker, who's like a famous photographer. And so at the end of the job, you know, I'll usually, if I do a job and if it takes me like a month to work on this job, I'll like, when it's done, I'm like one post and like, that's it. And it would even occur to me that like some people like aren't even seeing that, but I don't want to be annoying and post all the time. You know, at that period, I was trying to figure out exactly what my approach was. And then so after that job, Nigel posted like 5 videos, like a ton of content about this one job. And to me, I saw it and I was like, there's no way that you don't know that he did this job. You know what I mean? And then I looked at my stuff and I was like, you could easily miss that I even worked on this thing because I had one little post. You know what I mean? So I realized I was like, okay, I need to have a much stronger presence on social because this is not going away. You know what I mean? It just became more of a priority for me. And being able to put it in my schedule, I was like, okay, now is the time for me to really do it.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah.
You want to take the headphones off?
Sure.
What comes to mind for me is like making noise and making a little bit of noise. And I think it's in a Malcolm Gladwell book or something. Also making noise. There's a lot of noise happening in the background right now.
Gardeners are outside for sure.
Which is great. This is so funny because I've done this podcast for over a year and probably about 13 months now at this apartment. Mm-hmm. And there's always every once in a while like really loud noises, but it always happens just before or after the podcast. Yeah. But today we hit the unfortunate lottery.
It's all good.
We'll work through it.
Yeah.
These mics are pretty good at cutting that out. But anyway, so I forget where it came from, but it was about making noise. And there was this dishwasher that they made that was so efficient and so quiet that you wouldn't even hear it working. And then people kept returning it because they thought it was broken, because they didn't know it wasn't making any noise. So basically they added a light hum, a light sound to it to let people know that work was happening. Yeah. And sometimes people have to do this in the corporate environment where they have to let their bosses know what they're doing. And if they don't, then they assume that they're not doing shit. Yeah. But in fact, they could be busting their ass. But in the same way of like being in the industry and working on some pretty amazing projects, you need to be able to take ownership and credit for it and be like, hey, that's something that I did, you know? And then, but there's also like opportunity, I think, like twofold, and like people see that you could potentially get work from it. You could also build an audience. That could be an avenue for, you know, monetizing and creating content in a totally different way.
Yeah. I mean, there's no downsides to making more content as a filmmaker and as a creator, other than it just takes up your time. You know what I mean? But like, if that becomes a part of what you want to be doing and a part of your overall like plan for your career, then it's worth it. And it's interesting you're talking about sort of like letting people know that you're working. I see that all the time with like clients and creative directors where they want input just so they can either say that they did something or like feel like they're contributing to the shoots. And so they're always like chiming in with like random thoughts, and half of my job then is like trying to make them feel like incorporated, but still like retaining my ideas, like what I wanted to do, you know? So
they'll be like, oh, so can I get co-director credit on that?
Yeah, I mean, not so. I mean, some people have gone that far, but like, but most of the time it's like them just chiming out ideas to just be a part, not necessarily because they're like, oh, this is an idea that I feel like will absolutely make things better, but just like, oh, like how about this or how about that? So they can influence it, and I think then go to their bosses and be like, oh yeah, that was my thing, or that was my thing, you know. So I think everybody is always trying to sort of like assert their value and sort of like leave their mark on it. And the other thing I want to say about that too is like, it is super valuable, of course, to let people know what you're working on. And I think for me, it was a bit of a challenge to sort of figure out like when that's an appropriate thing, and then when that comes off as like braggy or like just becoming too boastful, you know. And so I think that it's an important, the only thing I can really distinguish it is like with the tone, you know what I mean? Like tone plays a really big part in whether it's like you're showcasing a bit of your work that you're proud of, and then you're like coming off as being like braggy, you know, because I never want to be that braggy type of person. But like on social, it's like, kind of are bragging, you know what I mean? So it's been a bit of a thing to navigate a little bit for me.
Well, I could say just from watching the vlogs that you've done, some behind the scenes shoots where like you're directing Bruce Willis or you're doing any of these really cool things with huge talent, like your personality comes across as like somebody who's just like super stoked to be there and to be able to experience it. But then also like, what I found to be really a great takeaway was seeing how confident you were in those situations. A lot of it was just like watching you work, right? Where it's just like, this is the way that you direct talent in like 10 seconds. Like they're there, and they got to come in and out, and you got to make sure that like you have like some politeness and formalities and not go too quick. But then I think your personality, like the longer that you do it and the longer that you make it, as long as like you are a good person and like you want the best, and like you're just trying to like either show people a side that they may not have seen, or to teach people, or to just, you know, let people be able to watch a video and have a good time. Yeah. I think in the long run, that stuff's going to come out. And like, because it would be so draining to fake that, right? If you had to put on a personality every time you turn the camera on.
Yeah, that would be tricky, and I think that's sort of like, that's the long-term recourse of this social world that we're living in. Like everybody is presenting something, and even me, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost sort of like false to think that I'm not filtering things online. It all is, but it's like, does that mean that it's not, the stuff that I show is not truly me? You know what I mean? I mean, we can get into this whole like ethereal discussion about social identity and your true identity and stuff, but I think that, you know, it is important, just exactly as you said, you know, to be yourself and to use your personality to whatever advantages it can give you on set. And I think for me, I've sort of been fortunate enough to find a way to I mean, I'm Canadian. My politeness plays a big part into my directing style. But in those moments, you know, just to work on, I guess try to, you know, figure out how to use your personality as a strength on set is really valuable. And of course, faking that would be not only exhausting, but probably not effective.
Yeah. And I think that there is what's cool is that you can see so many different templates and so many different directors or whatever craft it is that we're talking about that have totally different personality types. There's so many YouTubers I know that are actually quiet, reserved, and, introverted.
Yeah.
But they're able to use that to their strengths and how they
Sure.
tell a story. And I think that's one of those things that people, when you just see those that are like maybe the outgoing, eccentric director, then that's like that's the person that you say, oh, that's what it takes to direct. Be like, oh, well, you could actually be quiet and laid back.
Absolutely. It's always fascinating to me to see the different personalities as well, and to see how people approach their creative process and their creativity and like the things that they make, because I think that the people that are successful do exactly that, where they use whatever their strengths are to their advantage. If it is sort of like the quiet, introspective person that just will speak when they have that one great idea, or like the flamboyant extrovert, like shouting out all this stuff. I mean, they all, if they're successful, they all have a good end product. They're just getting there in a different way, and I always find that really fascinating.
When we talk about like confidence and having confidence in what you do and really heading into a shoot like, say, the Glambot. You can describe the Glambot a little bit, because it's an interesting example.
Sure.
Where you have to like direct so many people, short period of time. You have to be super confident. You're working with, every celebrity you could imagine, because we're on the red carpet of, what was it, the Emmys? Or
So there's four award shows that do the Glambot for E. So it starts off with the Emmys, then Golden Globes, then the Grammys, and then the Oscars. And so we have my own booth on the red carpet with this thing called the Cinebolt, which is a motion control system. We put a Phantom Flex 4K camera on the end of it, and it's this robotic arm that moves like 20 feet in 1.1 seconds. So the camera will move super, super fast. We'll shoot at 1,000 frames a second, and then the end result is you get this really natural like dolly move, but in super slow motion. So camera's like moving quite a bit. You get a bunch of parallax and cool effects, and talent's like flinging their hair in super slow motion. And it's like a cool way to experience the red carpet in a new kind of a fashion. But it is exactly that, where you're like back to back with like big name celebrities, and you have like 30 seconds to explain what's going on, and they have no idea. Like sometimes I think that like, oh, maybe they've seen it or whatever, and they might have an idea, but it's like they're like, what is this? What am I doing? Like how? Like what? And you need to be, like you can get hurt. Like that thing is flying like at them. You know what I mean? So like you need to like explain that it's dangerous, explain the parameters, be personable, like make it enjoyable for them, because it's like, if I have an attitude or something's not going right, then they're gone. Publicist pulls them and they're gone. It's even happened where they'll come. I've explained the whole spiel. They'll come up. They're standing on the thing, and I'm like ready to go 3, 2, 1 action. And publicist is like, nope, they gotta go, and they pull them out. And like, so the environment is crazy. I think it's like it's fun and exciting, but like it's tiring on your brain, to say the least. You know what I mean? But the thing you mentioned about confidence is, I think that there's something to be said about, I think fake it till you make it is sort of like the wrong term, but the idea of like, if I'm nervous, like being nervous is only going to be a detriment to me. So I should just ignore the fact that I'm nervous and like just focus on the task at hand. And then that will empower me to do a better job. Because, if I'm nervous, being nervous about it is like only gonna hurt me, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's like really important to like, as far as confidence goes, like, yes, I feel like I can do a good job, but just to be in the right headspace to sort of do the best version of whatever it is that I can, And I think that really helps a lot. So it's not necessarily like faking it, but it's like putting your mind in the right place to do your best job in that moment is really helpful.
Yeah, I think a lot of people suffer with like the imposter syndrome, to feel like they don't belong or like they're not worthy to be there. There's probably gonna be an element of that in the beginning.
I experienced it for sure.
Yeah, and as you're doing projects that you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for this, because you have to inevitably do those shoots and work on those projects that feel like a huge leap if you want to progress and move forward.
Course. A job making a film is like, when it's done, it's done. You're not going back and re-editing it. You're not going back and like changing the color. It's like that, when that paint dries, that's the end of it. You know what I mean? And so there is something quote unquote perfect about the idea that like you finished it and it's done and it's perfect for the time that you made it. So like, I like that. It's more of like an acceptance of perfection. Mm-hmm. The idea of like the traditional like 10 out of 10 perfect, I've never really like subscribed to that train of thought, because you're always inevitably just going to be left disappointed. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because the day 5 minutes when you call rap, you're like, oh, I should have done this. You know, you're instantly like thinking back in hindsight of like what you could have done. And in the edit, you're like, oh, there's this shot or that shot. And so I far prefer to like look back and recognize the things I want to change and I would change, or things that I could do better, or things that I now have a deeper understanding for now. But it's like, I like to look back on my past work and be like, that was as good as I could do at that time. And that's as perfect as I can strive for. There's no more perfect version than that. You know what I mean? And I think that is helpful, because I hate the idea of like looking back and like beating myself up, because I've done it on my work. I'm like, oh God, like that shot or this thing or that edit, you know, it's like, of course I've done it. And I'm like, it's not servicing me in any way. It's making me feel bad about something I should be proud of. And it's like making me focus on the past instead of the future. So it's not helping in any way, you know?
Yeah, it's like when people ask you for feedback on their work. Like if somebody's a filmmaker that's been doing it for a year, I'm going to look at that through different eyes. I'm not going to look at that like this is somebody that's been working for 20 years and they want like constructive feedback in this certain way. A lot of times people just need like an encouragement and just say, hey, just keep, like, you're doing amazing work, just keep going. And I think that we should also look at ourselves in that same light. It's like when we're looking at work that we've done years ago, it's never going to stack up to what we're currently doing. If you're getting better, it shouldn't, you know? Or at
least it'd be a problem if it was the same.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So I think it does take a little bit of like forgiveness and being polite with ourselves and nice with ourselves, because we can be our own worst critics.
It's hard to gain perspective on your own work though, because of those reasons exactly. But even when you're mentioning like looking into other people's work, I think that one of the insights that you and I can gain, or sort of have gained over our experience, is like picking out the things that, how can I say this, like are the keys that would help in their success, right? So it's like, sure, it's like maybe they cross the axis, or like they light something wrong, but I'm like, you'll figure out that technical crap. That's not a worry. But if I've seen stuff where it's like technically wrong, but I can tell they have a good eye, and I'll give them feedback on that, because it's like that I think can come through even with like technical mishaps or like poor, like beginner mistakes. You know what I mean? I've seen work for people that I'm like, I get sent reels a bunch, you know what I mean? And I'll watch them and I'll try to give my 2 cents. And some people where it's like, it's technically not great, but they have a style, they have like an eye, and like that you can pick out, and you can sort of like encourage them with that kind of a thing too, which I find often really, really helpful.
Right. I think like in those situations, it is like a delicate balance between wanting to encourage people, but then also not just saying, you're perfect, you're great, you're done. You know what I mean? Like, because I think people that are hungry and that do want to improve, they want to know, like, where do you think that are my shortcomings? Where do you think I can work on better? Like you're somebody who's got 10 years experience and you've got a way better eye than me.
When I moved to LA, I'm friends with a bunch of dancers. Like I'm in the dance community. And so I would talk to dancers who had done a ton of music videos, a ton of commercials, and I'd ask them about their experience working with the directors, who was good, who was bad. And a prevailing theme that always came up was like, poor directors were ones that could not make decisions, and good directors were ones that could make decisions. And it was always when they're like, oh, the set was a mess because the director like couldn't decide or couldn't figure it out, or like he and hawing and changing their mind. And I was like, okay. And then when they're like, oh, this director was great, he knew what he wanted, he communicated it clearly, and like we had a great shoot. And so from then on, I was like, I need to empower myself to make the best decisions and sort of be able to like just be decisive on things, because that seems to be like a thing that will really help someone in their career. And in turn, I believe it really has. Being decisive is like the number one thing you can do to be on time, on budget, and make something cool.
What do you think it is that prevents people from making decisions?
I mean, they just don't want to make the wrong one, right? You know what I mean? So, and I think that like I don't think that there's something inherently bad about making a quote unquote wrong decision. If you commit to it, you know, you can, I mean, obviously it depends on how bad of the decision is, but for the most part, it's just like, you're like, should you be on this left side or should you be on the right side? Do you want to be high? Do you want to be low? Should we push in or should we pull out? Like those kinds of things. It's yes, there might be an objectively right decision, but like if you make the wrong one in those sense, it's like not the end of the world, and you're far better served to just make one and commit to it. You know what I mean? And so I think that and if you can't make the decision, it's because of a lack of knowledge or understanding, right? Like a push in and a pull out is going to feel different to the viewer. If you don't have enough experience to know how that feels different, then you're not empowered enough to make that decision. So it's like it's experience really that can give you the information to make that decision. But even if you don't know, if you just pick one, then it's just like, that's even better than not deciding, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Because that's going to slow things down, and then people are going to be confused and be like, I don't know what it's like that just causes a ripple effect on set. And it's very much like a top-down thing on set. If your director or if you is sort of like kind of all over the place mentally, or like can't make up their mind, it's like every department head is then scrambling because they don't know what they want, and like everybody below them is scrambling, and it just creates a frenetic environment that is not conducive to having a good end product.
Yeah, so it seems like it's the experience will help you make the right decision, or at least the decision that's going to best service the vision that you've come up with for this project. Like you said, there are certain things when it comes to filmmaking that will make the viewer feel a certain way, and like a director's trying to make them, so if they want to feel like this is a really tense situation, you might push in, or you might go close up or whatever, and that stuff is going to come with experience and really understanding what you're doing. But no matter what, like you said, you need to be able to have that mindset of, I'm going to make decisions, I'm going to make them quickly, and I'm going to be efficient about it. Is there something you can do before heading into a shoot that will allow you to make decisions better and more quickly? Is there a certain like amount of preparation that you can use in going into a shoot where you'd be like, well, you automatically know that you're going to be saying no to this certain direction because you've already got a focus?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if there's a thing that you can do to help you make decisions more quickly on set. Obviously, being prepared is the number one thing, because if you're not prepared, then you're just gonna have more questions, right? So the more you can prepare, the less questions you have, and the less questions you have, the easier you can tackle them, right? So if you come to set and you get asked 50 questions, like, okay, maybe I can handle that. If you're not prepared, you're gonna get asked 150, and then you're inevitably gonna get overwhelmed, and then that becomes problematic, right? So doing all the standard things of like having a plan, shot list, like being clear with what you want. But it's like you're always like, that's the other thing I realized, is that like a director, like your job is to answer questions. Like that's your job. People will be like, should I stand here? Should I do this? Should we have this light here? What color should this be? You know what I mean? Like your job is to provide those answers. So I think that, I think knowing that, and like we stated, it's just like committing to being decisive on it is better than a wrong choice or being undecisive. But I also think that it's very much like a muscle. You know what I mean? I think that that's a thing. Being decisive can be a thing that you can excel at and progress at and become better at.
It's so frustrating for everybody around you, whether it's a friend or if you're on a crew, and you're like, can you just make a decision? Somebody has to make a decision. Yeah. Where are we going out to eat tonight?
Yeah.
Like, can you just, and if you get into a place where it's just like, like say even that example of like going out to eat tonight, make a decision. Maybe you picked Chick-fil-A. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe you regret it 2 hours later. But at least you ate.
You there?
And you got on with your day.
Exactly. And I think that's sort of like, that's a good example, because if you look at that, like going out to eat with a bunch of friends, and it's like there's nobody there to make a decision. Like how quickly do you waste time? Do you argue? Do you dispute? And it's like an hour will go by and you still haven't left. You still haven't gone to eat. But it's like, it obviously doesn't work where there's one person in charge of your group of friends unless you structure it that way. There is one person in charge on set, right? And so if you imagine, take that sort of environment that we've all experienced, and you apply that to set. If you can't figure out what you're doing or where you're gonna go eat on set, it's like you're in just as much of a clusterfuck on set as you are with your friends trying to decide where to go eat, right? So that's just like. It's even more important because it's like time and money. It's not just your evening that you're wasting,
Was it challenging to go from a position where you are a solo crew to directing larger crews and directing talent?
Yes and no. I mean, there was a slight progression with obviously moments of like big jumps where you show up to a set and you're like, oh, there's 20 more people now than last time, right? But last time there was like 8 people, and now there's 28. So it's like there was definitely a progression where we started to get a couple crew in. I'd have, 2-3 people help me out, and then I'd have 5 people help me out. Then we'd have 10 people there, and then, then there was like 25 people there. So there's a couple moments, there's a couple jobs where the crew got exponentially bigger. And in that moment, it's sort of like, not scary, but it's sort of like just sobering in the sense where you're like, oh, like this one's for real. Like there's a lot of people here. Like you're in charge. Like, again, don't let the nerves get to you. Just focus on like what you need to do. You still need to like create clips and shots of things that you need to make a cool video at the end. And that's the same thing I was doing when I had one friend with me. You know what I mean? And so like 2 examples are like the first Katy Perry videos I did. So for her California Dreams World Tour, there was a short film that played throughout her concert that was like 7 segments that were act breaks in between the show that told a continuous storyline of like this story of she worked in a butcher shop and she wanted to date this baker's boy and open up her own bakery. And so I wrote and directed this almost short film that played in between her whole concert, right? And so that was like, I'd done some stuff obviously with like smaller crews, but that was like a 3-day shoot with like all these different sets, a huge build, and like 4 major artists, 4 world tour. Like the pressure was definitely on. And like going in, having discussions with, the gaffer and grip when there's like, 3 and 3, or maybe we had 4 and 4 on that one. We had a big crew, we had to move fast. It was like a little intimidating. And that was definitely one of those moments where I was like, am I in over my head on this one? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But it was just like, it was an interesting experience. And I didn't learn some lessons that I had to learn later. Like what I sort of would do, because of not my lack of confidence, but because I was sort of like had those moments of self-doubt or more so like not enough information and / experience, I'd rely on the department heads a lot for things. So they would come to me with questions. They'd be like, oh, like, well, should we do this or should we do that? And I would go like, what do you think? Like, what do you think we should do, right? And they would give their 2 cents in.
Dude, I've done the same
Oh,
exact
totally.
thing.
You're just like, well, what do you think? Like, if I have no idea, I'm like, what do you think we should do? And I think that's fine because it's like, you're not expected to know everything. And they're there because they're professionals at their craft and they can provide insight and experience, right? And so, but what I feel like I did on that one was like rely on them a little too much. You know what I mean? And I think that ended up becoming a bit problematic to the point where on later shoots for other things, if I would ask their opinion and I would have a gut feeling of like doing something else. And I'd be like, but they've been gaffing for 20 years. They know what they're doing. And I would sort of do their recommendation and then later regret it and be like, I should have listened to like what I knew I wanted to do inside. And so the lesson for me became, like having enough confidence to like be in not a disagreement, but have a different choice than your department heads and sticking to it because you are confident that that's the right decision, even though they're leaning another way. So I sort of like leaned too far to rely on them to then my trick was like, not trick, but the thing I had to learn was sort of like then regaining my confidence like later on in my career, being like, oh no, like stick to your guns on what you really want because it's like, it's your vision and what you need to do. You know
right.
what I mean?
Especially if you're trying to do something creative, a little bit different. These people that have been doing it for 20 years, they have a certain set of skills, but what you're bringing to the table is a little bit different. Like your vision and your eye, but that's very difficult to be able to step out of that and to be able to go against what their opinion would
Absolutely.
be.
And that took me learning how to be really confident in my decisions. Like we've been talking about confidence this whole time, and just owning your decisions and being okay, like having that realization of being like, okay, like I'm going to stick to my guns on this and it might be the wrong decision, but it's like, this is what I'm feeling. And it's always a balance because I think that going either way too far is problematic. If you sort of like always rely on their insight, it's like you're never really creating your own thing. But if you're so regimented in your way and your vision, that's also problematic. So it's like, it's always about finding a balance and just trying to be open to what the best decision might be. But like, if you have a thought for what you want to do, like you are the director, it's like make your decision and go with it,
There's a hierarchy built into those situations on set where it's pretty clean cut. You got a call sheet and then everybody knows who they're reporting to, and usually there's not much stepping on toes. but you can still screw up as a director, as a leader. So like, how do you come on set and like have people respect you, respect the decisions that you're making, but also make sure that it's an enjoyable experience? Because we've all worked with people that have been unpleasant and that haven't, you wouldn't want to work with again.
Yeah, I mean, as far as respect on set, you have to earn it, or you have to like earn to keep it. I think that even if you're walking into a set and it's all new people, they're going to inherently respect you until you start like disregarding, or if you're like a dick, or until they lose it. You know what I mean? Like if they don't start, and even with you, if you don't respect them and they don't respect, like you have to walk to the table with like a level of respect for everybody underneath you in the hierarchy, down to the PAs. You know what I mean? And that should be returned. But like it can go away quickly if you are a dickhead, or you don't know, or it's like you just become problematic, or if you're not showing them respect, then you're going to lose all their respect, right? So it's a tricky thing that I think is solved with just being a nice person that puts effort into being good to work with. The thing that I've noticed in LA is that a lot of the really successful people are genuinely like kind, creative, nice individuals. And the examples of like these tyrant directors who it's like my way or the highway is very few and far between. And I have seen some that work, but it is a stressful working environment, and I never want my job to be like that. You know what I mean? And so I've always just tried to approach it a little differently. And I think too, like a thing that helps me is I generally work with a lot of the same people. I have a few DPs that I work with all the time, and then, a couple producers, and it's like we round up the same caterers, the same sound people, and it's like we know how each other work, we all enjoy it, and that really, really helps in keeping the mood and the on set light, which I think is really important, because yes, you're there to make a good product, but a large part of it is the process too. And like if you are again frazzled or upset or just like going crazy on set, it's not fun for anybody, and then their craft suffers, your end product suffers. So it doesn't serve your vision of like creating something great if the process is problematic or struggling, When you're looking at like the comparison of like the big budget stuff versus the small budget projects, or even say projects that you work on by yourself that are just for fun, whether it's vlogging or it's just short YouTube videos, do you find that sometimes the bigger projects can get kind of it's more difficult to execute on the vision? Sometimes are you hoping like man, I wish we didn't have like a crew of 50 people here, like this could have been so much more fun or intimate, or we could have been able to do something cooler if it was just 5 people, we could have been more nimble. Sure. Obviously there's a time and place for each, but I'm curious if there's been those times where you wish that you kept things, or you wish it would have been possible to keep things simpler. I mean, it sort of inevitably happens, but again, it's one of those things where I'm like, if I'm on set with 50 people wishing that we had 5 there, that doesn't help me execute what I want to do with 50 people. You know what I mean? So I try to keep those types of thoughts, even if I have them, just sort of at bay. And I really, I guess, I think a theme that sort of isn't coming up is just like really focusing on what your end goal is, and ruminating on things that could have or would have been. Do help in that moment? It's good to have like a postmortem and look back on what you did and then realize like, okay, like maybe we didn't need this or maybe we didn't need that. It is what it is on set. You can't necessarily change your structure. And so you just have to figure out the best way to get it done. And I think that's actually a thing that I enjoy, like those little challenges on set of finding your creative solutions with the means that you have. And that's either being understaffed or overstaffed. It's like up to you to figure out the creative way to get you and your crew to where you need to be. And I like that challenge. I like being understaffed and being like, we're going to figure out like exactly what to do to get all the things that we need to get this shot. And when you're overstaffed and there's like craziness and like all this stuff going on, it's like how to rein it all in and focus everybody and like get everybody on the same page to then become efficient as this sort of behemoth crew. I like both challenges on that. Yeah. Do things always go wrong? Like when you're working, like you look at like every shoot you've had, like isn't it all problem solving? Like have there been many shoots where you're like, well, that went exactly as I expected it to? Not many. I mean, there has been some, you know what I mean? But only on like the one I just did this shoot for Garnier with Mandy Moore, and it was sort of like a half PSA for, I don't know if I'm allowed to say what it was, but it was sort of like a good cause, a charity thing. And so a lot of it was sort of like just PSAE, where she's explaining the benefits of doing XYZ, right? And so she's reading from a teleprompter, and she just nails it unbelievably well. And we had her scheduled to do stuff after lunch, and we shot the whole thing before lunch, and it was like everything would look great, and the client was happy, and she was happy. We got her out of there. We wrapped early. And so, but that was like a super simple shoot, right? If there's ever any complexity, there was no... That one, there's no figuring out. It's like teleprompter's going to be here, and like she's going to look at camera and read the thing, you know? Mm-hmm. So on those really simple shoots, I think that can happen. When you're starting to get to creative types of things where there's a lot more variables, it never goes as planned. But where you deviate from your plan is often where you find bits of magic, I find, you know? So there's always going to be these shots that you sort of discover on set that will then inevitably put you a little behind schedule, but like those are kind of the best shots on set. And then as far as things going wrong, like, yeah, every time there's, of course, right? And you're right in the sense of like, it is problem solving always. Even when it's going right, you're still problem solving on like, how are we getting these 6 shots before we got to move on, you know? And so I think that that's a part of the job. And that's a thing that you should embrace, because for the most part, it never goes to plan. You know what I mean? And it's always this new random thing, or like, we don't have this or we don't have that. And it's, again, your job to figure out a solution to make it happen.
What kind of things are you excited about in terms of both avenues, like the original stuff you're making and the big stuff? Like, do you have any crazy ambitious goals or projects that you envision?
Of course. I mean, for me, it's like the goal has always been, like long form narrative feature is kind of the goal, right? And so that is a thing I'm obviously excited about. But what, with the short form digital space, what I think is really cool and fascinating is sort of being able to like curate your own audience and like be in charge and in control of it, and create something that then gives you this new value when you're out pitching bigger things. So we were touching on this before. It's just the idea of like creating your own audience and having this built-in, group of people that are into your work is super valuable these days. So that is really exciting. And not just like for the value, but like I've been having a lot of fun with YouTube because it really is getting me back to like how I started, when I just made videos for fun and like had some crazy idea and went out and shot it and then showed it to my friends, and now I put it online. And so that is like invigorating to me, where it's like just me and a camera making some cool stuff. So that's like just inspiring. It's like getting back to your roots, you know what I mean? And it's stepping away from like, because as I mentioned before, it's like, half the job now is this directing is like a managerial thing where you're like working with client and agency and like all these people involved, and it's your job to like corral them all to then get this cool video. It's like the idea of like cutting out all that, just you figuring something out, is like super fun and energizing for me these days.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see where it's going to go too, because you take a look at the way that media is changing, and it's everything's going online. And if your podcast can get 1 million downloads per episode, what's the difference between that and 1 million views on a film or on a TV show?
I will tell you this: the difference is the gap is shrinking rapidly. You know what I mean? And the only thing holding it back is our conceptions of what these two things mean. And again, as we mentioned before, like we still hold on to those too. You know what I mean? It's like looking back on other forms of non-traditional media. I think we all hold biases on being like, it's like YouTube. You know what I mean? Or like, it's like just this. But these gaps in between digital content, TV, social features are all shrinking, and you can see it with talent. Like, 10 years ago, a movie star would not do TV ever. You know what I mean? A film director would never direct an episode of TV. They're very separate. And then, digital just didn't even really exist. But now it's like even those gaps are shrinking. The idea of like someone being, there's people that are more popular on social platforms than like traditional movie stars. So it's like everything is just shifting and all sort of becoming one thing. And that I think is like for better or for worse. You know what I mean? I think there's some pros to that and there's some cons to that, but that is inevitably where we're going to. And so that's also been one of those driving forces where I'm like, if I not if I want to sustain myself, but there's an opportunity to sort of like to harness how the landscape of this industry is changing. And like, I don't want to let that pass me by. So I'm like, I'm in on this social digital stuff, you know?
Yeah, I think we saw it with Napster and like all these, the music industry not being able to adapt. And like, as creatives, you need to be able to adapt. And I still think it's pretty early. As far as like YouTube goes and creating content, like being able to cater to both platforms, because like in 10 years, who knows? I mean, the biggest, if you ask like certain, I think I just saw this recently, it was like certain demographic, like 13 to 18 or 25, whatever, like really young, whatever that Gen Z is, I think it is. If you ask Gen Z, like top 10 celebrity or famous people, and most of them are YouTubers.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, that's a huge shift. I mean, if you think about where it's going to go in 10 years, it doesn't matter. They're going to want to be able to consume content, and it doesn't have to be on TV or on Netflix.
Absolutely. I think there was this report by this company called Awesomeness TV, and they talked about stats like that. And one that I found super fascinating was asking Gen Z what they wanted to be when they grew up. And so doctor was still on there, engineer was still on there, but what was off was like pro athlete and like movie star. And what was on was like YouTube vlogger and professional gamer. And I'm like, oh, like they don't want to be movie stars anymore. They want to be a gamer, or they want to be like a YouTube celebrity. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's quickly changing, because this has just been, you think about it too, right? It's like the idea of someone being famous on YouTube and having a large amount of success is the past 5 years, right? Like that's just like recently. But for someone who's 15 today, was 10 5 years ago. So like, they're entering their teens and they're formulating their view on the world from 10 to 15. Like that's their whole life. You know what I mean? Like when you're 15, like what you did when you were 9 doesn't even exist. You know what I mean? You're like, who I am is the past few years. And so for someone who's been living in this world for their adult life, it's like they don't even know what a movie star is. It's like they consume all their media online. And so I think it's changing fast, but I also think it's changing really faster than, like the industry business structure is changing fast, but the culture is changing even faster, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you got Will Smith on YouTube. Like that's a huge step and a huge leap in terms of like what that means for creating and consuming content. And also he's doing it in a way that like a YouTuber would do it. There's definitely a lot of celebrities that are like have YouTube channels, but they're like the theme of that celebrity. It's not like they're actually creating content. And you know what I mean? As much as like Will Smith has a team behind him working on all these things, I think it is a step in that direction. And like, I mean, I think he always even said like, obviously he's done all these massive films, but the thing that everybody always recognizes him from all over the world is the Fresh Prince. It's like, because it's like an intimate experience to watch television in your home. And now that's what we have with YouTube. It's like people watching it in their apartment. They have a deep connection with these people, like in a way you feel like you know them, and in a way you do know them. I'm just really excited to see where it's going to go.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that connection, because you're 100% right, where it's like everybody who grew up with that show has like a personal connection with all of those characters on that show, right? Because there wasn't all this other media. Like that was the media we were getting, and like it's in human nature to create personal connections with people that you see, that you're familiar with, that like are in your world. And so, historically in your world is like one-on-one, person to person, but with TV, in your world could be the shows that you watch. So it's like everybody has that personal connection with Will Smith from The Fresh Prince. And so now we're watching all this media, and there's people that are putting out, vlogs every week or every day or whatever it is, and are speaking to the viewer in so much of a way that fosters more connection. Like they're literally talking directly to the viewer, that only makes stronger connections. And with so much media, and that being the stuff that is so easily accessible, it's no surprise that like that type of media is connecting with today's youth a lot more than like a TV show, because in absence of one-on-one discussions, be it through a screen or in person, a TV show's not that personal. They don't talk to you. You just watch them live their lives, right? And you sure can feel a part of it over a long time. You're involved in the story. But like when someone like shows like, yo, I woke up today and I did this, I did that, and now I'm going to go here. You're like, oh, you're with them. And those personal connections are so much stronger. And I think we're still doing the same thing, but it's just so much easier to be connected to those people now.
Yeah, and I think that at that same time, we're seeing a trend in terms of vulnerability, especially when it comes to like masculinity, because like men being open with their emotions, you know what I mean, for generations,
it's a new thing.
Holding things down.
Yep.
And then now like you see all these people, whether it's vloggers or whatever, people on YouTube just sharing their emotions, being honest and open with their audiences.
Yeah.
And that's going to drive a deeper connection with that
Totally.
audience.
And I think, there's so many really, really cool benefits of this social content and YouTube. And I think that's one of them. You know what I mean? Like having an open discussion about, masculinity and the identity of men, I think has been this like structured thing that people have sort of like held on to for years that, again, I don't think has necessarily been servicing men. So it's like this new media and like people, even like it happens a lot through like hip hop and rap music, you know what I mean? Because that's a community that has been holding very strongly to this idea of like super ultra masculine guys. And you have like Drake out there singing about different things that sort of affect him emotionally. That sends a big message, I think, for someone who, and he's a good person for that because, when he can like rap sort of like as hard as all the other rappers, but then he'll sing about something sort of like what he's going through. And just consuming that and understanding that someone that you look up to is being open and like vulnerable has a large effect on today's youth, in my opinion. I'm a little above the youth, but like I still notice a difference in that, it's like people are doing it now, but nobody before him was really doing that. And I think it had an effect on pop culture. I mean, he's not a hip hop, he's a pop artist, you know what I mean? It's pop culture at this point. And I think he's had an effect on sort of like youth today and an extension of all of this content of people just being open to camera, I think has been helpful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see it just go even deeper and deeper, especially with, like you said, when people who you look up to, the ones that are at the top of the game that are either like Will Smith vlogging, or you got Drake that's actually getting like emotional and talking about his feelings. Like that stuff is like, I think it's important, and it's like it's servicing your art. It's like you're able to put yourself into your work. And then, I mean, not to say that everything we create has to be like intense and deep and whatever, because I think that there needs to be a balance, and like you I want to create content and I want to consume content that's also fun and light.
Yeah. But it's good that like, as we're talking about the topic of men, that like that is now an avenue for you to do that should you want to. Where I think is before it was like if there wasn't this cultural change but YouTube existed and you came out and just started talking about your emotions, people would be like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? So, but it's just good that that's a possibility now. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's a part of, I mean, I'm sure culture across the board is sort of like evolving, but I think a little bit in part of like what we're talking about as far as social and this like fostering these interpersonal connections through the internet, it breeds this openness and vulnerability, which I think is a good thing.
What do you think will help people cut through the noise, whether it's traditional trying to get a directing job, or like I think more interesting is like if you're a content creator online, when you have thousands of other people who are putting stuff out there, how do you separate yourself from them?
That's a great question. And I think that the answer is sort of like a cliche one where it's like, nobody is you. You are an individual with your own distinct voice, your own distinct experiences. Like nobody's life has been the same as yours. You have this unique perspective. And I think an important thing is like harnessing what that perspective is and being able to communicate that. Like that can be tricky, like being able to express your voice, but your voice is so unique and distinct to you that if you can find a way to showcase that, you will inevitably be different than everybody else. And I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind, because we all struggle with this idea that like, you can't stand out, or you don't have anything new to offer, or there isn't anything sort of quote unquote special about you. Like we've all had those thoughts, but the idea that you are an individual that does have your uniqueness is in your experience, finding a way to communicate that, I think, is really valuable. I also heard this one piece of, I wish I could remember who said this, but what's better than being good is being different. And that really resonated with me because it's new and it's fresh and there's value in that. So it's a thing that I've sort of been trying to figure out how to implement in my career a little bit more. But it's an interesting thought that being different is better than being good.
Yeah, like to be able to have your work speak for itself, that somebody sees it and it's not just like a slick car commercial. You're like, that's good, that's great, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But like, what makes it weird? What makes it like unique? And I think those are the kind of things that we need to lean into, because that's the path that's not necessarily safe, especially when you're working with a client and you're trying to pitch them on this like really weird, silly idea, and you're like, listen, like it takes a lot to be able to stand up for those kind of crazy ideas. Sometimes it's not going to work. A lot of times it's probably not going to work. But that's cool. Like I think we need to encourage each other to just like take risks.
Absolutely. Like take risks and just sort of like find what makes you an individual. And like, as cliche as that sounds, like that's really the way to go, because you know, like we all learn the same 3 light setups, you know what I mean? Like we all learn the same technical things, you know what I mean? But it's like, it's your individuality that is really going to make it different and create a different style, tone, and like flavor in what you're doing. And I think that everybody's value, whatever that value may be, relies on that. And that I think is like really an important thing to recognize and harness, because people worry about technical stuff so much. People worry about resolutions. And it's just like all this stuff. And I'm like, it matters a little bit, but like, what are you doing to sort of like showcase your voice? Because that's the thing that nobody else has. Everybody else got red cameras. Everybody's got DSLRs, you know what I mean? But like nobody has your voice, right?
It matters in a way that if we never upgraded our camera from the HVX back in the day, you were going to get jobs today if that was the camera you were still shooting with. Like, trust me, this is like my vision. I'm going to use this like shoot to tape. But like, apart from that, like you can now get a camera that's like 3-4 years old for really cheap on eBay that is just as good quality level as the cameras today. And like, it's shrinking every single day. But like you said, it's so small, the difference in terms of the quality, and like
it doesn't really matter. I mean, I think like having the coolest, latest stuff is cool, but I've never gotten a job because I'm like, oh, I have master primes in an Airy. Like I've never gotten a job because of that. You know what I mean? I don't have those, but if I did, but like, you know, with gear, with like, I've never sold a job on any sort of technical thing. You know what I mean?
I think a lot of people think that that's what they need. Like people think, well, if I get this red camera, then I'll book more gigs. Like, is that true of cinematographers or DPs versus directors?
Okay, so there's a slight argument for that for a DP, I'll say. Yeah. Because for me, you know, because we're shifting away from the traditional like post house or rental house kind of business model. If I can hire a DP that has a camera and lenses, like has a camera package, I would prefer to give them the money than to go to a corporation or even just a big company that someone owns, you know, and have them take that rate and, you know, have their markup and all that kind of stuff. You know, it makes me feel better to like give it to somebody. So it's like, it's easier for me, and it's simpler, where I don't need to send someone to go prep at the rental house, and like it's like logistically easier if a DP owns it. So in that sense, it can be beneficial. But I would hate for people to the takeaway being like, oh, you got to buy a camera to be a DP. Like you don't. And even when we're talking about sort of like YouTube creating your own content, it's like you need to own a camera to make something. But again, it's like that can't and shouldn't be the thing that you're focusing on to get work. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I got a camera, you should hire me. It's just like, can you use the camera well? Can you shoot, you know, like, can you make something cool?
That's the thing is, like I was just helping my sister get set up because she's trying to buy a camera and get into that side of things. And you can look up footage online. You can see really great footage with that lens combo, with that camera. But I'm like, it's going to take a while before you can shoot it like that.
Exactly.
It's not, you can't just pick it up and go in auto and imagine that it's going to look the same or that the way the edit's going to come together. But definitely don't let the camera be the barrier that stops you to get into it.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I have a couple of sayings that I like with respect to this, is that the best camera for you is the one in your hand. So be it an iPhone or DSLR or a red camera, like that, the one that you have in your hand that you're shooting with is by far the best. So it's like, if you're looking to get into it, just get a camera, any camera, and start. But then the other thing about, having sort of the best stuff, it's interesting how people equate your talent to your camera, where it's like if you go to a dinner and like someone cooks you this amazing meal, at the end of it, nobody goes like, what kind of stove do you have? That like, you must have a great stove to be able to cook this awesome meal. And you're just like, that would never make sense. But the number of times I show someone something dope, like, what camera are you using? Like, what what kind of camera is that? And I'm just like, it's this, but it's like, that's not necessarily what makes it good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny. On that same note, like I know at least one person who has taken, like, he's rented out his camera and he's used the footage shot on those projects in his reel. And it's like, because it was his camera that shot it, right? Like,
wow.
How crazy is that?
That's insane.
Yeah, you're like, that wasn't your project.
Why don't you just take any footage that was shot on that camera ever? And just
but that was my camera that shot it.
That's
but I think it's something that people should know, that like there's do's and don'ts. That's a big don't.
Yeah. And it's so, with trying to get that recognition online, like those lines are being broken constantly in a way that I'm not okay with. Like, that's not okay. You know what I mean? And like, we're all trying to like maximize what we do and represent ourselves the best. But I don't know. It's like, it's good to have a bit of a moral compass on what you're doing and like, just don't do stuff like that.
Yeah, don't cheat.
Don't cheat. Don't lie. Don't misrepresent yourself.
You got to do it for the long run. You can't, because people, they're just looking for that quick short-term gain.
Yeah.
But in the long run, you're going to lose your integrity. Like, there's certain things that you can't get back.
Well, you'll lose your integrity, but you'll also, like, people will slowly realize that, like, oh, this guy's not that good, because it's like those amazing shots were not shot by him. You know what I mean? And so he shows up on set and he like lights something horribly, and they're like, what happened here? Like, that reputation will then start to catch up to him. You know what I mean? So like, my approach is like, I want to do this and I want to do it right. I really want to learn. I really want to figure out what makes someone good, how someone can excel at making beautiful images and being successful with creating their own stuff and having good relationships with brands and clients. Like, that like fascinates me and drives me to figure out how to become truly like someone who is great at what they do. That's a goal. It's not that I want to just like get a job or be this thing. It's like, I really thrive off that idea of finding success due to talent and like being a good person to work with. And so it's never, if holding those values in my mind, the idea of cheating has never occurred to me. And like, granted, it's like, I'm not going to say, like, I've taken some liberties in my career and even in like showcasing my work. But I mean, it's sort of weird, because it's like, I'll say that you have to use your own discretion, right? And so there's two things. It's kind of like puts me in a weird position, right? So it's like, I'm using my own discretion on my own work with like showing what I've done. And it's like that I'm keeping it in alignment with me. And so it's like, I feel okay about what I'm showcasing. But then again, if you look at that guy and you're like, if he does the same thing and if he's okay with showcasing that as being like his work, then I'm like, who am I to judge him? You know what I mean? I guess it's just a thing, like, I would never do that. And like, I feel like doing that type of approach will definitely catch up with you, and that isn't sustainable because you're not actually working.
Are there blurry lines? Like, what are you talking about here in terms of like?
So I'll give you an example, right? So it's like, I did this thing for Red Bull, and so we did these. It was called Parallels, and we were comparing different forms of dance to different forms of extreme sports and athletics, and how like grace, balance, and these different sort of facets play into sort of like are beneficial to both types of movement, right? It was this movement-based thing. So we compared like a ballerina to a motocross person and how grace can affect both of these disciplines, right? So we're comparing both things. So I shot all the dance stuff, and then with Red Bull, we licensed their motocross footage to draw the comparison. So I didn't go out and shoot the motocross stuff, but I created this narrative thing that included footage that I licensed with footage that I shot. And at first I was like, can I put this on my reel? I didn't shoot it, so like maybe I can't put it on my reel. But then I sort of started to think that like, this is a part of the vision that I created. I created this story and this idea comparing these two things, and this footage is in a piece that I directed and created. So therefore, as far as me as a director, I can put it in. If that was like a cinematography reel, I could not put it in at all because I didn't shoot that. But I created a piece that included that and those things as story elements. And so feel like I'm taking a liberty in showcasing that. And I think that comes from like my early beginnings of like me shooting everything and holding the camera, because even now when I'm directing, I'm sitting at a monitor. I'm not holding the camera, but it's still like my job and my piece overall. But definitely at the time, I was kind of like, I don't know if I can put that in.
Right, because like if you imagine a photographer, they still are the ones usually snapping the photo.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's very easy to be like, well, he took that shot. But imagine like sitting back in a chair and be like, yes, take that photo over there. Like it feels weird. It's definitely a different. It's just a different, slightly different world, and I think it's just one of those. It's a perspective shift.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you like think about it, like Ken Burns would never be able to have a reel because everything he does is like stock footage and archival footage. But it's like, of course he would like, if he needed it, he could create like a sizzle reel or not that Ken Burns needs it, but
imagine how exciting that sizzle reel would be. It's like slow moving pictures just going through. But yeah, I mean, it is at your discretion, I guess. But to circle back to the point, it is valuable to sort of retain your integrity. I think that in the long run, that really, really plays a part in someone's success. And I think that people will gravitate towards that, and that will resonate with people. Sure, if you throw that stuff out the window, you might get a couple jobs here and there, but I don't think that it's sustainable in any kind of way.
You've mentioned that you have a lot of drive. Have you ever found that drive has gotten in the way of your personal well-being?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, definitely. And more so early in my career, you know what I mean? I think that, it's tough in LA. It's tough to make a name. It's tough to get work. And so I think that, a big lesson that I've had to learn is to figure out that work-life balance. I think in the past few years, I've sort of come to a good balance in that, but it was a thing I had to focus on. I came to the point of like, and I think everybody sort of goes through this where it's like you were working nonstop and you're like, why am I working so much? Like I'm working just to keep working, and like it's great, I love it, but like when am I enjoying life at all? And so last year I actually took a bunch of breaks and I traveled a bunch, and it was just kind of like the year before I had that realization. I was like, what am I doing this for? You know what I mean? I'm just working and like earning money and like working and like it's cool, but where am I enjoying life? And so it's definitely been a lesson to learn. But even in that, I will say that I think it is very valuable to go to both extremes on this. I think that it's very valuable to have nothing stand in your way, to sacrifice everything else going in your life and dive as deep as you can into a subject and to like just like immerse yourself completely. I think that you get something out of that you cannot get by doing even a diligent work on something, like fully diving in and like ignoring things in your life to get to where you want to be. Is really valuable. You cannot sustain that for more than like a couple years, but I do think that that's valuable. Once you go do that, then it's like the pendulum's gonna swing way to the other side, and then you need to like chill out and be like, okay, I need a little break, and you'll inevitably find the right balance. But I think that like, because the baseline is having talent, and then it just depends on, right place, right time, your personality. It's like who like all these other factors play a huge role in your success. Like you need to just dive in as much as you can and figure out how it's going to work for you, because how it worked for me isn't how it's going to work for you, is how it's going to work for someone else. Mm-hmm. So you really need to spend that time. So I think that there is a value, but like, please don't do that forever, because you'll just ruin yourself and it will be eventually problematic. But a little bit is good, I think.
Right. Every once in a while you need to grind, but
of course,
you don't want your life to turn into a grind.
No, yeah, because then it's like, then again, like I said, we all have that realization of like, what's it for? It's like we're all working so hard, and it's like, yes, we do enjoy the process, but at some point you're just like, oh, like I'm just working myself. I'm sacrificing too much for too long, and it becomes not worth it. So yeah, that's been a big lesson for me, is to just like ease back and be like, okay, like, at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, you're like, okay, work's done now for today. I'm going to stop and I'm going to go do something else. Or I'm going to, And more so, the tricky thing is not necessarily like quote unquote like putting the pen down, but like not feeling guilty about putting the pen down. You know what I mean? Because there's two different ways you can do it. You can go, well, I'm going to stop working now, and then from at like 6 o'clock, and then from 6 to 10, you just feel guilty the whole time. You're like, oh, I should be like editing this thing or doing this other thing. You know what I mean? It's like, that's not servicing you either. The benefit is from stopping working and then like not feeling bad about it and really enjoying your time doing something else completely other than work. But that takes a second. I mean, at least for me, it took a second to like be able to do that.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that advice though of finding the boundaries, because I do think we need to kind of experiment a little bit and maybe push ourselves a little bit too far. Like, you know, put ourselves completely into a project to where maybe we do tip the scale in the other direction.
Yeah.
But then that's how you know where your boundaries are.
Exactly.
And that's how you know when like, okay, things are getting a little bit overwhelming for me. Or when you're planning out a project and a deadline, now you can say, well, I'm not going to do this in 2 weeks because it's just going to burn me out. So I'm going to, you know, say 3 weeks on this.
Totally. And that's what I mean. It's like, there's value in burning yourself out once or twice, you know, because you know how far you can go, you know what it takes. And then it's like, if you're ever in that situation, like unwillingly, you're like, oh, I know I can pound through this.
Yeah.
You know, I think I learned that lesson in college, actually. You know, it's like, high school was fine. It wasn't, I did the minimum amount of work to like get by, you know, but when I went to university, it's like doing term papers and studying for final exams. It's like, I really pushed myself, you know, I needed to work hard to just get decent grades because it's a lot harder workload. And so I always say, like, if I moved to LA, like right out of high school, I wouldn't have the work ethic to survive out here. You know, I found out how hard I could work, you know, by getting a degree and like doing term papers and grinding, pulling all-nighters, you know what I mean? So that was like the first time in my life where I really had to push. And then moving to LA after that experience, I was like, oh, I know I can do it, you know, because I had to go through this uncomfortable process and sort of like really, really push myself to figure out how to get a B or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And so I think that there was value in that for me. And I think that, you know, diving in fully and like really grinding it out, you just know where as you said, your boundaries are.
You want to do some quick questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
If you could go back to, say, like 20, 22 years old, is there advice you'd give yourself, or is there something that you would do differently at that time?
Ooh, I think probably advice I'd give myself, but I hate the idea that I think I might have done something wrong, because even in my wrong decisions for the moment, I learned a valuable lesson. You know, I think that there's always, you know, I've definitely made some things that I felt bad about or like led me down the wrong path, but in going down the wrong path, I eventually figured out how to get back on the right path, and there was a lesson in that. So, you know, if I said, oh, go correct this or go do that, I might not have learned lessons that really helped me later in life. So, and I hate that idea of regret. I really try to regret nothing. You know what I mean? Every decision I've made, I made it to my best ability at that moment. You know, like I've always just been like, whatever decision is like, this is the best I can decide right now. And so of course you end up getting, you know, in hindsight, you have more knowledge and more information that maybe you should have done something different, but at the time I didn't have it. So I really try not to beat myself up over decisions that I've made, because I was doing the best that I could at that time, right? As far as advice, my one piece of advice would just to be to enjoy it more, you know? And I think back to my early years in LA, and of course it was filled with like a ton of uncertainty and a ton of stress, because it's like not really working, don't know if my career is going to work out, eating ramen every week, you know, trying to figure out how to pay rent. And like, that's like a stressful time, but it also was this time of like the world is your oyster in a sense, like anything is possible. And it was really like this really invigorating period of my life that in hindsight, I look back and go like, that was so awesome. Like first coming out here and just like the whole world is new, and like just like this bright-eyed kid from Canada, like trying to figure it out. That's such a magical, special moment. But in that moment, I was far too stressed about paying rent or doing XYZ or getting this job or that job. And I don't think I obviously did not have the perspective to step out of that and like enjoy it. But in that lesson, I'm trying to apply that thought to now, where I'm like, I know in 10 years, I'm going to look back in this period where I like live at the beach and go surfing in the morning and be like, oh God, I wish I could just get back there.
Yeah.
So I really try to like not stress out about as much as I can to really like try to live my life today, like with the hindsight of the future, I guess. So I'm even like, so I would give myself that tip, but I'm getting that tip from my future self right now. You know what I mean?
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
I think, that's one of those things that's really, really tough, because I wonder if that kind of anxiousness, that kind of like, feeling, I gotta pay rent, and I gotta do all these things, like that kind of frenetic energy is helpful early on, because it maybe drives you to make certain decisions.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because here's the thing, when you're first starting out, I really think that you need to say yes to as much as you possibly can. Like, if you're not getting work, you just gotta get experience. And if something doesn't align with your values, you can certainly say no. But I think apart from that, it's like, just get work, do weddings, do bar mitzvahs, whatever you can, like pay the bills and all that stuff. And then get to a point where you can start saying no to certain projects. But I think it does take quite a bit to be able to. There might be something to the fact that the struggle is a good thing.
I agree completely. You know what I mean? And I think that it is, and that's another example of like the idea of like, I don't wish I did anything different for that exact reason. Like, in some sense, I don't wish I was less stressed out when I was here, like early in my career here, because maybe I wouldn't have worked as hard, or maybe I wouldn't have done XYZ, right? So, but there definitely is. I think that it can only be beneficial where you're like worried about paying rent. So you're like, I got to go do a job, and you get experience and you do more stuff, So like, it's all a part of what happens, So
yeah, but I do think that is definitely advice to like just try to enjoy the moments in between.
Yeah, because I can still like want to bust my ass and be able to take a second to be like, oh, this is like a cool period in life. You know what I mean? Because when you're in it, you never look at it with the perspective of looking back, right? So I'm trying to like find a way to like mentally trick myself to be like, no, I'm like me in the future looking back at now, like enjoying my life right now. So it helps a little bit,
That's great. Is there one universal skill, not exactly like, filmmaking skill, but just a skill in general that creators should be learning?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say you should learn how to learn. I think the one thing that has benefited me in my career is I think I can digest and process stuff well, sort of like, and that breaks down to learning. So it's like, as I mentioned, like learning everything I can about every department. The idea of learning is a skill that you can get good at. You can sort of code and analyze information better, and like really compartmentalize things and break them down into bite-sized pieces that you can then understand and apply. And that, if you're trying to create, like the more you know, the better. So I would say like learning, it's sort of a weird thing. Learning is the thing you should learn, but being good at learning will be the one thing that can apply to everything.
All right, 2 more questions and we'll wrap this up. How do you get through doubt?
How do I get through doubt?
Yeah, when you're feeling like doubtful.
Shit. I mean, I think recognizing that everybody has it is a thing that might not get me through it, but provides a bit of comfort and reassurance when you're in it. So it's like, if I feel doubtful or shitty or whatever, we can swear on this one, right?
Yeah, we've been swearing.
Okay, great, yeah. Just understanding that, like, my heroes are not exempt from that. You know what I mean? And I think that in at least is comforting enough to sort of like have it not get to me too much. I also sort of understand that it is temporary, hopefully it doesn't last that long, and when it becomes to be, we all go up and down, and there's moments of like, being on top of the world and jubilant to the extreme, and then being just kind of like in the gutter and just sort of like wondering what you're even doing, right? But I just, it is comforting for me to sort of remember that everybody goes through it, and it is only temporary. And so I really try not to draw any kind of permanent bits of identity or sort of have that affect me in the long run. Whereas I'm like, okay, I'm feeling doubtful now, and this sucks because I think that I suck. But like, I know at some point it'll pass, or at some point I'll get energized again in a new way. And so I do one of two things. I either just ride it out, because I don't think that it's bad. I don't think negative feelings are bad. I think that it's far more detrimental to try to shun them away and think that you shouldn't feel them than just accept feeling them and have them kind of like pass through you. because that can result in like bottling them up and it then becoming problematic in the future. So I either just kind of being like, okay, like I feel doubtful or bad or whatever it might be. I'll start the clock, and like if I still feel this way in 2 weeks, then maybe I'll do something about it. And if not, I'll just maybe change my focus, or I try not to let it affect me too much. The problem is when it like lines up with something important. Like if you're about to do a big thing and then you're feeling doubtful that day or the week leading up to it, that becomes problematic. But I think that that's just like a mindset thing, because I've definitely gone into a lot of jobs where I don't feel like I'm the one or like good enough or like prepared enough. But again, it's like, I'm like, well, if the day's in 5 days, I'm like, in 6 days we'll have done something. Like, hopefully, like it gets done good enough, right. There's one thing to like set it aside, be like, okay, I see you there. I'm going to set you aside. And there's one thing to like suppress it and be like, it's not happening. Like everything is fine. That I think is bad. Yeah. But like going like, okay, I feel doubtful, but like that's not going to help me. So I'm just going to focus on what will help me. That I think is good.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome, man. Well, if people want to find you online, where should we send them?
My website, colewalliser.com, is kind of like the main hub for things. But on the daily, I'm pretty active on Instagram, which again is my name, colewalliser.com, at colewalliser. Mm-hmm. And then all my YouTube stuff is on YouTube, which is also my name, Cole Walliser. So I'm trying to keep it simple. Just remember my name and you're good to go.
Awesome, man. Thanks for doing this.
Of course. Thanks for having me. This was great.
Thanks for listening to The Ground Up Show. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you want to support the show, you can do so on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/Matt D'Avella to support the show for as little as $1 an episode. And for a little bit extra, you can get access to my private AMA podcast episodes where I take questions exclusively from Patreon subscribers, or check out my secret vlogs where I talk about lifestyle design, creativity, filmmaking, and business. I pack a lot of value into these videos that can be seen nowhere else online but Patreon. Again, that's patreon.com/Matt D'Avella. Thanks for listening to the show, and I will see you guys next week.